I had been reclassifying a set of deep-core microbiomes in Subarchive 17 when the first alert sounded. It was not the general alert, not the planetary defense tier. It was Standing Order Valdran Custodial, a protocol so old that most of the watch officers on the surface had never heard it fire. I had my predecessor explained it to me the day she handed over the custodianship, and her predecessor had explained it to her, and so on through a chain of archivists stretching back further than most surface civilizations could trace their own histories. The order was simple. When a vessel matching Korvathi biotransit patterns entered Earth's atmosphere, the senior archivist of the Valdran Deep Archive was to proceed to surface reception level, meet the arrivals, and demonstrate custodianship. I set down my tools, sealed the microbiome chamber, and took the primary lift. 900 meters of vertical transit through stone and reinforced alloy, past 62,000 years of continuous construction, environmental bays, genetic index corridors, specimen preservation halls, and the deep thermal regulators that kept the lowest vaults at their original deposit temperature to within 1/10 of a degree. I had made that transit perhaps 10,000 times in my career. It had never felt quite like this. The lift opened onto the surface platform at 14:11, local time, bright midday. The sky above the Valdran shelf was its usual pale blue, crossed by the faint lines of the orbital transit grid, and, further up, the distant shapes of the 7th Carrier Group's patrol wing holding station at 400 kilometers. The megacity of Karen stretched to the south, nearly 200 kilometers of vertical architecture, its upper tiers catching the afternoon sun. To the northwest, the intake towers of the Archive's atmospheric regulation system rose in a patient line along the ridge, each one 60 meters tall, humming at a frequency I had long stopped noticing. The Korvathi vessel was already on descent. It was smaller than I had expected. The records in the archive describe their transit craft as broad-hulled biological haulers, designed for atmospheric entry and specimen extraction, built for cargo, not war. This one matched the profile, though its hull plating looked older than our earliest projections had assumed. Pitted, patched in places with alloys that did not quite match the original. It came down on the northern landing terrace with a caution that told me its crew could see the carrier group above them. I stood on the reception platform with 2 surface liaison officers and waited. The vessel's forward ramp lowered. 11 Korvathi came down it in formation. They were taller than the archive's morphological records had led me to imagine. Dense, heavy-jointed frames, sheathed in dark integument, like layered cartilage over metallic substructure. Broad, flat-planed faces, with deep-set ocular clusters that moved independently. They wore equipment harnesses, extraction tools, and sidearms. Not a war party, but not unarmed. Their team leader stopped at the base of the ramp and looked at me, then past me, at the intake towers along the ridge, the distant megacity skyline, the orbital shapes above the haze. His ocular clusters contracted slowly. He spoke through a translation array mounted on his harness. The voice came out flattened, processed, but the meaning was plain. We are here for Deposit 77 Keth. Biological specimens cached on this coordinate, 85,000 standard years ago. Our claim is prior. I had rehearsed this conversation in my head for 31 years. Every archivist before me had rehearsed it in theirs. I gave the answer the order required. Your deposit was located 62,000 years ago, I said. It was opened, cataloged, and transferred to environmentally controlled preservation. I am the senior archivist of the Valdran Deep Archive. Your specimens are intact. All of them. He studied me. The ocular clusters shifted, refocused. Behind him, his team was looking at the skyline. One of them had turned back toward the vessel, as though measuring whether they could lift off quickly enough if they needed to. You opened our deposit, the team leader said. Yes. You removed our specimens. We moved them to a more suitable environment. The original cache was degrading. Thermal migration in the substrate had shifted its temperature profile by 11 degrees over the interval. Without intervention, biological viability would have been lost within another 4,000 years. We intervened. He was quiet after that for longer than felt comfortable. I invited them below. The primary lift carried all of us, the 11 Korvathi, the 2 liaison officers, and me, down through the first 900 meters. I explained the archive's history as we descended. 62,000 years ago, a geothermal survey team had breached the upper wall of the Korvathi deposit cache and recognized the contents as biological specimens of non-terrestrial origin. The specimens were transferred to containment. A permanent archival facility was authorized. Construction began that year. Construction had not stopped since. The lift opened onto Corridor Catharin 1, the main index passage. It ran for 11 kilometers in a straight line, temperature controlled within half a degree along its entire length, lined on both sides with specimen reference displays. Each panel carried a biological profile, the organism's full genetic index, its environmental tolerances, its relationship to other specimens in the collection, and the date it was first catalogued by a human archivist. The Korvathi team leader walked in silence. His ocular clusters moved from panel to panel. I watched him read the genetic indices, and I saw the moment he realized that several of them included structural annotations his own people's records had never mapped. We had found layers in their specimens that the original depositors either had not looked for or had not possessed the instruments to detect. 62,000 years of continuous study had gone deeper than the Korvathi's initial survey. I took them through Subarchive 3, where the atmospheric specimens were held in sealed biome chambers, entire microecologies reconstructed from the cached biological material and maintained at original deposition conditions for millennia. The current chambers were accurate to tolerances the Korvathi deposit team would not have thought to specify. I took them through the deep thermal vault, where the most fragile specimens were kept at the precise temperature of the original cache, monitored by thermal regulators that had themselves been rebuilt and improved across 600 centuries of incremental engineering. I showed them the genetic concordance hall. It occupied the lowest level of the central column, cut from living rock, temperature stable, vibration dampened. The complete cross-referenced index of every specimen in the Korvathi deposit filled a display wall that stretched for 1/4 of a kilometer. Each entry linked outward to comparative terrestrial biology, parallel non-terrestrial deposits, and an integrated genetic atlas compiled across longer spans than most of the Korvathi's allied civilizations had existed. 11 Korvathi stood in that hall and said nothing. Their team leader turned to me eventually. His voice was quieter through the translation array than it had been on the surface. "This facility," he said, "how many of your people maintain it?" "The current complement is 312 archivists, plus support and engineering staff. The role is generational. My family has held custodianship in the Valdran line for 900 years. There are other lines older than mine." 900 years, he repeated. "For one family. For mine, the archive itself has operated continuously for 62,000. He looked at the concordance wall, then back along the corridor behind us, 11 kilometers of indexed specimens, every one of them his species property by original deposit. Every one of them now understood more thoroughly than his own people had understood them when they were first cached in the ground. "We came to retrieve deposit 77 Keth," he said. "Our claim is prior." "Your claim is noted," I said. "The archive has a response prepared." I brought up the custodianship record on the nearest display terminal. 62,000 years of logged maintenance, temperature adjustments, genetic decay interventions, atmospheric recalibrations, specimen viability assessments performed every 400 days without interruption, for longer than most spacefaring civilizations maintain their own administrative records. "You cached these specimens and left," I said. "Earth found them. Earth preserved them. Earth studied them. Earth maintained them when your original containment was failing, and continued to maintain them for 62,000 years after that. Unbroken custodianship. And what does that mean? He said. For our retrieval. It means you came with extraction tools and sidearms to a coordinate you expected to find empty. If you had sent a request through the diplomatic channels we have been monitoring for the last 9,000 years, the conversation might have started differently. Instead, you landed a retrieval crew on a planetary archive maintained by a civilization that remembered you were coming back before your own records did. He held my gaze. All of his ocular clusters had gone still, every one of them fixed on my face. What I saw there was not anger and not fear. It was the expression of a being who had come to collect something small from a place he assumed was empty, and had found instead that the ground beneath his feet went down further than he had imagined ground could go. He turned, gathered his team, and walked back to the lift without another word. I escorted them to the surface. They boarded their vessel. The ramp closed. The ship lifted off the northern terrace with the same careful restraint it had shown on the way down, and rose through the bright afternoon sky until it was a dark point against the orbital grid. The two liaison officers returned to their posts. I stood on the reception platform for a few minutes longer, watching the sky settle back into its ordinary stillness. Then I took the lift down. 900 meters. Subarchive 17. The deep core microbiomes were still waiting for reclassification. 62,000 years of continuous work. One more afternoon of it. That was the job, and it was enough.